guys, I'm Mac. Welcome, Commissioner Peirce. It's so nice to have you here. Everyone is thrilled to welcome you to Denver.
Mackenzie. Hello, ETHDenver. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
And part of that has to do with the fact that people see you as, the friendliest and staunchest ally of the crypto community when it comes to US regulators. And I will say this, I feel like in this room, the SEC is enemy number one. And I think that people feel like you are the exception to the rule. I don't know how lonely it feels over at the SEC for you. But my question is, it's historically been this tenuous relationship between the agency and the crypto ecosystem. To you, where does that relationship stand today? Is it still pretty tense, or do you think it's getting better? Like, how is the SEC doing in terms of its relationship to the sector?
Well, let me start by giving you my disclaimer, which is that my views are my own views as a commissioner, not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners. It's fractured. It's definitely fractured, and it's sitting inside the SEC. It's very frustrating for me to see that, because I don't think it has to be that way.
Yeah, and I think that, a lot of people, there are 20,000 people who came into Denver for this conference. A lot of them are developers and builders and the coders who are really creating this industry. And I want to start with how the regulatory apparatus intersects with the people who are building these decentralized applications. And the perfect example of this is the broker-dealer rule. And so earlier this month, at least as I read it, the SEC broadened out its definition of a dealer such that it seems to kind of encompass and ensnare DeFi within this new rule change. And so I think to a lot of the people who have come in, they're keen to understand how does this impact them, because they think of themselves as builders and coders, not as licensable brokers. So that's a scary change in terms of definitionally how they see themselves professionally.
No, I agree. It is troubling, and when we adopted that rule, I tried to understand, have the staff who were recommending the rule to us help me understand how does this apply to an AMM, for example. Who has to register? Everyone using it? The developers? Well, the developers probably not, was the answer I got. I don't like the probably piece of that. But the whole concept of decentralization stands very much in contrast to what we're used to at the SEC, which is we have a centralized entity that we can grab hold of. And when you have just people working together and you have someone interacting with code instead of with a person or an entity, it's a real challenge for the SEC to figure out what to do with that.
Yeah, and another part of this, this dealer rule that was just adopted is this redefinition of an exchange, which could potentially impact people who are building decentralized exchanges. And so to people in the room here who are, coders and working on DEXs, what does this mean to them as you understand it?
So that rule is still out. It's been proposed, and then we put out another request for comment, which really filled out how it would apply in the crypto world. And as I read it, what it said is you better centralize, you better get out of the US, or if you don't want to do either of those, you can shut down. Those are your options. So let's hope that we get to a better place on adoption. But I'm really quite worried about where that rule is going to go.
Where are we on token safe harbor? Because it's, to those who aren't familiar with this, it's something that you conceived of back in 2020, I believe, this 3-year window where you would grant projects the opportunity to decentralize before the SEC would pursue action against them. It didn't get much traction internally within the SEC. Representative McHenry tried to fold it into a bill that, again, did not make it that far along. But it seems like a great idea. So, is there any hope of potentially incorporating that into the apparatus in some capacity?
Look, right now we're sort of in an enforcement-only mode, really, other than some of these rulemakings that you mentioned that touch on crypto, though they're not really directed at crypto. But I think with ideas like the token safe harbor, which really the idea is just, look, let's get some basic disclosure out there, and then let's allow projects time to get to that decentralization point. Ideas like that, which people are welcome to iterate on, and some people have already, We really need to work on those kinds of ideas and have them ready to go. I always say, well, maybe Chair Gensler will wake up tomorrow morning and have an epiphany, and we'll be in a different place. So we need to have ideas on the shelf ready to go when that happens.
The SEC has brought a number of enforcement actions against major players in the space. You've got Coinbase, Uniswap. Now, generally speaking, you have made the point that this heavy emphasis on enforcement is a mistake. When the SEC doubled its capacity on this front, you put a tweet out there that basically asked, why are we leading with enforcement in crypto? And my question to you is, what's the alternative at this point? I mean, there are no hard and fast rules coming from Congress, so what do you do?
Well, I mean, I think you don't go after people who are asking you for some clear rules around how to proceed in this space. I mean, obviously, I think everyone in this room knows that there are lots of fraudulent people people who are engaging in fraud in the name of crypto, and there may well be room for us in that area. We've brought a number of cases in that area, and that makes sense. But when you're talking about registration violations, because someone has touched a crypto asset, that we then come in years later and say, that is security. It seems pointless, because you're bringing a case against someone where there's no allegation that anyone was hurt, right? So this is just strictly about compliance with a registration obligation. And I'm not minimizing the importance of registration obligations, but if you're not willing to tell people what a security is, it just seems very unproductive to go in after the fact and just start picking people off for not having registered.
Now, you made the point a minute ago that you need to have proposals waiting in the wings in case Chair Gensler wakes up and has some sort of epiphany and changes his view on how he sees the space. I think many in this room would argue, these are not my words, that he's made it his mission to end crypto in some capacity. But my question is more about, how does the SEC get more comfortable with this sector? Does that come from a change of commissioners, of the chair, change in the White House where you have a turnover in priorities in terms of how they're staffing the SEC? And one note that I'm going to make here is that I know that Chair Gensler's term ends naturally in 2026, but typically what's been the case is that if you have a turnover in the White House that results in a party change, a chair will typically tender their resignation. Just noting that. But anyways, back to my original question, what does it take to change the tide at the SEC?
I really think it takes us sitting down and reminding ourselves of what our role is. And our role is not to necessarily even get comfortable with crypto. Our role is to say, hey, our job is to figure out where the securities laws are implicated, to try to help people get disclosure where there are securities, and then let people make their own decisions. It's not our job to tell people crypto good, crypto bad. Let's let the market decide. Let's let people decide. And I think it's really reminding ourselves of that core role that it will take. And I'm not terribly optimistic that's going to happen tomorrow, but we got to keep hoping.
Yeah. I feel like crypto has become this partisan issue in the United States, but it really didn't need to be. So you've got Senator Warren, who is, firmly in the camp that's anti-crypto, and then, former President Trump has recently softened his stance on the crypto space, made some comments about Bitcoin that were seen as neutral to positive. And I guess my question is, how important is crypto going to be in terms of being a fixture in U.S. elections? We're headed into a major election cycle this year. Also, do you think it's troubling that it seems to be such a partisan issue nowadays?
Well, look, I think there are people on both sides of the aisle who feel strongly one way or the other. So I like us just, again, to take us back to what we are as an American people and what's important. And those principles are ones that people on both sides of the aisle, I think, can agree to, which is that we're a country about people making decisions for themselves and their families. They know best. They know their circumstances best. They know their limitations best and their strengths best. And it really isn't about the government coming in and telling you what you can do with your life. The government is supposed to work for the people, and that's a fundamental American principle. Risk-taking, right? We're supposed to be a country where people are willing to take risks, and I might not be comfortable with the risks you take, and you might not be comfortable with the risks I take, but we're supposed to be about letting those risks be taken so that, you know, we can move forward with innovation. If we all want to bubble wrap ourselves, it will be a much less interesting country, and I think very different from what we set out to be.
You know, yeah. In the last year, the SEC has lost a lot of court cases. I'm thinking about Grayscale. I'm thinking about Ripple. How is that going over internally? Are some people happy that a court intervened to kind of change the direction?
Well, again, I can only speak for myself and say, and I can't talk about any ongoing enforcement cases, but what I can say is look, the Grayscale case basically gave us the option of approving a Bitcoin exchange-traded product. And it's remarkable to me that it took a court to tell us that we had to do that. I started in 2018. That summer, we had our first Bitcoin exchange-traded product come before us as a commission. And I thought back then, which was quite a long time ago now, we should have said yes to it. And it took how many years? 6 years in a court to get us to a yes. And that just isn't, it's not how it should be, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, you know, in the absence of a court ruling in favor of Grayscale, it seems like it wouldn't have made it to the finish line, these spot Bitcoin ETFs. And some people make the point that, you know, you could have saved investors a lot of headaches in terms of having a safe vehicle to invest in the space that's, you know, an established pathway, you know, instead of going through a lot of these, you know, the on and off ramps to crypto can be problematic. We've seen that in terms of security and issues in the last few years, and this could have been a safe alternative. But kind of staying on this issue of a spot ETF, so you know, spot Bitcoin ETFs, we've seen a lot of flows since they were approved. Where are we on an Ether spot ETF?
Well, I'm going to use the lawyer's answer again and say it's under consideration at the SEC, so there's not a lot I can say on that, though I'm sure people here are interested in finding out what's going to happen.
Is it going to take more court intervention to get that one to the finish line?
Look, you know, everything is a facts and circumstances determination. I think you all can go back and read the statements that came out at the time that the Bitcoin exchange-traded products were approved. I actually think those, I commend those to your reading. Commissioner Crenshaw's statement, I think, gave a real window into her thinking on crypto. And Chair Gensler's gave a window into his thinking, so I commend those to you to get a sense of sort of the world we're in right now. Yeah.
Now I know that you can't get into the specifics of ongoing litigation, and Coinbase is still, you know, at odds with you guys in the court system. But what I do want to ask you about is that there was this huge freak out yesterday, and Coinbase is characterizing what happened as an outage. What users saw was that a lot of their account balances going to zero. And my question is there a regulatory role here for the SEC in terms of navigating that kind of crisis scenario?
Well, look, I think one thing people in this space should be aware of is if you come to us when something goes wrong and you say, where were you, why weren't you there? Then what you're saying is we want you to be there, right? So you have to figure out what the balance is. Do you want us there or don't you want us there? And I think we as a country need to figure out when do we want a regulatory framework for something and when not. I sort of approach things as maybe evident, not concluding that regulation is always the answer. You can do a lot without the government being the one doing. Markets regulate, right? If you know, markets regulate people's behavior, so you don't always need the government to step in. What drives me crazy is when people are like, government, stay out, stay out, stay out, and then something bad happens and they're like, government, why didn't you protect me? Why didn't you tell me not to invest in this? So, you know, with freedom comes responsibility.
Yeah, and on that point, you know, like you've spoken to the fact that with crypto companies leaving the U.S., they're doing that because there isn't any sort of established framework. There are no hard and fast rules. There's this concern about facing litigation after the fact, and the issue that comes with firms decamping from the U.S. and operating elsewhere is that you still have U.S. users who are going to these platforms, but what they miss with that is like any sort of regulatory oversight where you can step in and provide more consumer protection. So it's kind of this like catch-22 almost.
Yeah, I think you're pointing out something really important, which is that some of the choices I think that the SEC has made are very strange from the perspective of people who favor regulation as a solution, because when you push entities away from the U.S., you're actually pushing them outside of the control or the reach of regulatory agencies in the U.S. So it's a little bit strange, and I think actually the regulatory approach we've taken is through enforcement is also strange, because if you really want to sort the bad behavior from the good behavior, having rules that are clear to people who want to follow them is a much better approach than doing this parachute in later with enforcement.
One thing I will say is you have countries like Singapore, the UAE, the wider EU with MiCA, who have established through legislative bodies these hard and fast rules, but they're not really enforcing them. And what I will say for the SEC and the CFTC and other regulators here in the U.S. is that they're the top crypto cop on the planet, and so they, at least to my view, they seem to be the only ones actually enforcing rules on the crypto space. Which, I mean, somebody's got to do it.
I mean, it's an interesting point. I think, again, it depends what you're talking about, right? If you're talking about fraudsters who are ripping people off, certainly I think we want someone to be there to go after those kinds of people. But look, I still think we're better off sitting down and thinking through what regulation makes sense in this area, and that should be a conversation. It shouldn't be a one-sided conversation through read our latest enforcement press release.
Yeah, I mean, thinking more broadly, I know that a lot of people, there was this chilling effect when Tornado Cash, OFAC, sanctioned a protocol for the first time ever. There's a dust attack soon after to show how unenforceable that kind of sanction was. And then you saw the developers, so these open source code developers, facing legal repercussions. One of them was jailed in Amsterdam. Two others, were dealing with the U.S. legal system. And I guess my question is that it feels like a scary time, at least this is what I'm hearing from some coders, it feels like a scary time to be working in open source code. People who previously felt comfortable being on stage, speaking at panels at an event like this don't want to do it, especially not in the U.S. Like, I've talked to a lot of people when I've been reporting overseas that just don't feel comfortable being here because they just don't know what waits for them in terms of being persecuted for the work that they're doing in open source.
Yeah, no, I think you're raising an important issue. I can't talk about, again, any particular cases, but I can say that that's one area where I think it's really important for people who are in this space to be thinking about how can we protect developers when they're writing code. The implications of building a permissioned regime where you have to get permission to write code are terrifying, right? And I think we really need to be very vigilant that no regulator is coming in and saying, hey, you need a permission card from me before you can write code. If we don't get this right now, we could have a big problem down the road.
Yeah. So I want to go to this conversation about stablecoins and CBDCs. It's really heating up. Do you think that in the US, a CBDC is a foregone conclusion? And do you think that there's space for a CBDC to coexist with these US dollar-pegged stablecoins?
I certainly don't think a CBDC is a foregone conclusion. I will say this a little bit outside of my remit. That's a Fed issue, not an SEC issue. But again, I think in my spot at the SEC, one of the areas that I have grown most concerned about is the expanding use of the financial system to surveil Americans' activities. And that is where I look at something like a CBDC and I say we again, really have to be extremely careful that we're not empowering the government to watch what you're doing in your financial lives if there's no reason to suspect you're doing anything wrong, or even worse, to be able to stop you from using the financial system, which obviously is something that people have concern people have raised with CBDCs. So I mean, that's, again, it's outside my purview, except to the extent that I think financial surveillance is something, again, along with this idea of protecting coders' ability to code, we have to protect Americans' right to live their lives without having the government watch everything you do.
Yeah, China has been a really early mover in this space, and there's certainly a lot of concerns around some of the surveillance issues that come up when you have a centrally issued virtual currency. Moving on, how concerned are you when you see huge price run-ups like the one happening now in terms of the Bitcoin and Ether price appreciation? Obviously, this is cyclical. Roughly every 4 years, we see this kind of bull run, but it also is accompanied by rug pulls and a lot of schemes. Like, is this when you start to see enforcement actions really pick up, or how concerned are you right now?
Well, look, the market can speak for itself, and people can make decisions about what they think it's worth to pay for something, and that's really not my spot as a regulator. What I will say is that I'm always encouraging people, no matter what you're buying, be skeptical, right? That's always what you should do. You should ask questions. That's just a valuable thing to keep in mind for anything that you're buying, and certainly, be on alert, because you're right. When the market goes up, the fraudsters hop in, and so that's something we all have to watch out for.
People are in this room, so many of them are builders or developers, and I think that what people are keen to hear from you is, how should they approach building in the space right now?
Well, look, I want you all to be able to look at the world, see problems, and think about solutions to those problems. And it actually makes me it's nice to be here because there's a lot of optimism here, and I like hearing people being excited about what they're building. But it makes me a little sad that a regulator is sitting here right now, because I think what I reflect is the fact that you all are spending part of your brain power thinking about, how do I build this in a way that sort of avoids those areas of regulatory ambiguity. And again, if we had clearer rules, you could focus your time and your energy on building what you're building, knowing what the rules are, so that you could stay on the right side of those rules. And so I guess, my advice is, help me think through what a good regulatory framework would look like. And I really think that we can get to a better place in the United States. It's taken a lot longer than I or probably you all want, but I do think we can get there if we work together and think about what would make sense. So that's my request of you.
How do people reach you? If they have ideas about what a regulatory framework should look like, what's the easiest way to get in touch with your office, or you personally?
Commissioner Peirce at sec.gov is a way to get in touch with my office. And I will say, when I travel to different places, I mean, you're welcome to come visit me in Washington, of course, but when I travel to different places, I usually post that on Twitter, X, and I'm happy to meet with people where you are. So please do take me up on that. It's always it's great to hear from you one-on-one, or a group of you together. So I appreciate those of you who have already done that, been willing to take time to talk with me, and I hope others of you will do the same.
What is the biggest thing that you want to have happen in this calendar year with respect to the work that the SEC is doing with crypto? Is there a rule change that you're after?
I just love to hear a more productive tone coming out of the SEC. When you say, well, this whole industry is lawless, that's not really a great way. When you say, well, just come in and register with us, okay, well then let's have a conversation about what that actually looks like. So I'd love to see a little bit of a more productive tone coming out of my agency. That's not much to ask for.
Anything keeping you up at night?
I mean, lots of things keep me up at night. But one of the things that keeps me up at night, which I think this technology can actually solve, is centralization means that you have concentrated risks, decentralization can actually bring resilience and strength to the financial system. So I'd love to see more resilience and more strength. Points of centralization always keep me up at night.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us, and to the audience.
So much. That was wonderful. Decentralization will